is going to be a very brief talk, at least compared to normal. We have Assistant Director Hunter Haskins here talking about the life of John Payne. And then for those of you that would like to join us, we're going to screen one of his movies afterwards, Kansas City Confidential. So Zoom, unfortunately, just because of technology constraints, will just be doing the talk portion for Zoom. But when this is eventually uploaded to the website, I'll try to have a link to, this is a public domain movie, that's why we're allowed to do this right now. So I'll try to have a link to the YouTube version of it in the description. But we're very, very glad that Hunter has agreed to talk for tonight. So if you have not met Hunter, he's our assistant director here. He came to us, he was an educator before he came here. He was at the Carlisle School and working as a blacksmith at the down in Bassett at their history centers. And so he is a wonderful historian, also a big film buff and film historian. So we're very glad to see that skill of his tonight. And thankfully, we have a great local tie with John Payne. So with that, I'll hand it over to him.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You almost made me blush. But yeah, and thank you all so much for coming out. This is almost a packed room. So I'm very pleased to be telling you tonight about one of Salem's most famous residents, John Payne. And so I've actually written down some of these facts because there's so much about this very interesting gentleman's life that I felt the need to go ahead and write it down almost as if it was a speech. And so if you'll bear with me while I read a little bit of this narration to you to make sure that I stay on track within about 20 or 25 minutes, we'll get started with the picture shortly after that. Is that good with everyone?
Yes.
All right, wonderful. Then I'll ask you to do one more thing. I want you to imagine it's November 23rd, 1949, and you're freezing your tail off. You're a rookie reporter for the Roanoke World News, and your editor has just handed you a plum assignment. Cover the unveiling of the Mill Mountain Star, the most elaborate creation your city has ever seen. Composed of more than 2,000 feet of neon and fluorescent tubing, the star is a bold attempt by the local Merchants Association to breathe life back into a mountain that has been largely abandoned since the incline railway in the old mountaintop inn went defunct decades prior. As you huddle with the crowd awaiting the ceremonial first lighting that evening, you notice the dignitaries representing local commerce and the laborers who spent long hours ensuring this Star of the South would light downtown Roanoke below. But one figure stands out among the rest, a man standing 6'3" and towering above them all. He's handsome, he's charming, and he's moving swiftly through the crowd when suddenly you realize he's actually climbing the star itself. Oh, that's just our John, one woman in the crowd remarks. And as this John, whoever he be, reaches the support bars nearly 35 feet off the ground, he shouts down to a man, Roy Kinsey Jr., ordering him to take the ladder away. That's Roy there. See, this John fella, he doesn't want it cluttering up the publicity photos that are about to be taken of him, and the star, of course, as well. Sure enough, he gets his way. Roy, the son of the man whose company designed and built the star, pulls the ladder back and waits at the bottom of this picture right here for this John fella to decide when he's ready to come down. When you ask another attendee who this daredevil John is, you get a stern reply that reminds you exactly why you're still the rookie on the beat. That man is John Payne, Hollywood leading man and our own native son. It's at that moment you realize there isn't just one star atop Mill Mountain this afternoon, there are two. John Howard Payne was born on May 23rd, 1912, to George Washington Payne, a real estate developer by profession, and Ida Hope Schaefer, a professionally trained opera singer who was educated first at the Virginia Seminary in Roanoke. As one can imagine, Mrs. Payne was perfectly capable of playing the perfect town socialite, one who could easily find article after article about while perusing the Salem Times Register in the 1920s and 30s, announcing that she was the host of the well-known visiting leaders of commerce, of industry, of even the military. And it was all right here in Salem. And it was exactly that air of social prominence that characterized the Payne family's presence in our area. Now, the Paynes didn't start out at their most famous residence here in Salem. We'll get to that in a second. In fact, they occupied a home on the corner of Franklin Road and Albemarle Avenue in Roanoke City first, close to where Bettina Altizer has her law practice. before eventually moving to the property that you see here, Fort Lewis, a magnificent antebellum mansion west of Salem, featuring a 7-acre front lawn, which you can see here, and a separate residence for the family's servants. Under the care of several nannies and even a chauffeur, John and his 2 brothers grew up as active outdoorsmen. He became an exceptionally strong swimmer in his family's unusual for the area private concrete pool. But his greatest passion was horseback riding. And in fact, his brother Ralph recounted to the Virginia Pilot, later recalling that the boys spent their entire youth constantly on horseback in the local countryside, making it particularly, quote, illogical to Ralph and his family when Hollywood was initially casting the naturally athletic John in musicals rather than the westerns for which his childhood had been preparing him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. After attending Broad Street School in Salem, John moved on to prep school at Mercersburg Academy in Pennsylvania, where he competed on the track team alongside future Roanoke College professor C. Homer Bass. After graduating high school, later in Alexandria, Virginia, he returned to Salem to enroll at Roanoke College, before later transferring to Columbia University in the fall of 1930. And although he later joked with students at Roanoke College in a surprise 1949 visit to the campus about his difficulties with math, as he put them, his talent for performance was already evident. He appeared in the Lab Theater's production of the temperance play 10 Nights in a Barroom, a performance so spirited, we should say, that while John's mother deemed it absolutely and unequivocally terrible, the head of the English department at that time, Dr. Charles Dawson, felt compelled to defend the young actor's budding ability so many years later, noting the talent of his student that was soon to be famous. And a quick thank you to, I know he's not here tonight, Mr. Steve Bass, the son of Homer Bass, for giving me this clipping here so I could learn a little bit more about how John was mobbed by co-eds when he came to campus in 49. Well, after transferring to Columbia, he pursued studies in journalism and honed in on his studies of drama as well. It was clear his mother's musical influence clearly remained a guiding force for the young man, as he also enrolled at that time at the Juilliard School to study voice. And despite the wealth of his family, John was determined to support himself, taking on a variety of odd jobs to fund his New York life. He soon became a familiar voice on the airwaves to the locals there, singing on several different radio programs, and eventually hosting his own show on WNEW, a program you can still listen to and tune into today in New York City. But it would be a mistake, though, to not tell you about his more, let's say, colorful means of support, which drew directly from the athletic prowess his brother Ralph noted he was developing back here in Salem. With his great height and the broad shoulders of a natural athlete, he entered the professional ring to pay his bills. He boxed under the name Tiger Jack Payne, and leaning into his theatrical talents, he wrestled under a villainous character of seedy origins, known only as Alexei Petrov, the savage of the steppes. I'd like to imagine pummeling men around in a ring all day helped forge his tough guy resilience that we'd see in the noir films like the one we're going to watch tonight, but who's to say? Payne's transition from the wrestling mat to the silver screen began when he was hired as a $40 a week stock player for the Schubert theaters in his area. His major break, though, at least according to Turner Classic Movies, eventually arrived shortly after in 1935, while he was performing in the Broadway review At Home Abroad, alongside a little lady named Beatrice Lilly, also known as the Lady Peel. One night, while serving as an understudy for the main star Reginald Gardner, Payne stepped into the leading role and caught the eye of a man named Fred Gailey, talent scout for a man named Samuel Goldwyn. By 1936, he'd landed his first film role in the picture Dodsworth, an adaptation of the Sinclair Lewis penned novel where he appeared alongside a gentleman named Walter Huston. If you know him, he's the father of the director of The Maltese Falcon and the African Queen, John Huston. And for our younger audience members here, Walter, pictured here, is the grandfather of Angelica Huston, who you might know as playing Morticia Adams in the 1990s Addams Family films. I was trying to hit the entire audience here. If you knew the grandfather or father, you at least know somebody there. And so in Dodsworth, John was billed by his full born name, John Howard Payne. and he played Houston's son-in-law in the film. And he followed this with leads in independent and minor studio films, such as Hats Off in 1936 and Love on Toast in 1937. Though with films that had titles like that, I guess you could imagine that he had yet to reach true star status. See, back in those days, actors had to sign contracts with major film studios like MGM and RKO that dictated that they could only appear in certain pictures for those studios alone, and also declaring that they had to do a certain set number of pictures with a set number of years within said contract. Confused yet? Thankfully, though, for John, Payne signed on pretty quickly with Warner Brothers, where he appeared in a string of films, including Garden of the Moon, skip a little bit quick there, and Garden of the Moon in 1938, Wings of the Navy in 1939, and that's a still from that in the middle, and Kid Nightingale, where I got those boxing photos earlier from 1939, in which he played a singing waiter turned boxer. Despite the steady work at that time, though, he grew increasingly unhappy with the role being offered to him. Hoping to do more, and eventually doing something that almost no one thought possible, he eventually asked for his release from the studio. During that transition time, he briefly returned to the Broadway stage, acting in the hit play Abe Lincoln in Illinois, later adapted for film, and he did that from 1938 to 39, before finally signing a long-term contract, a very coveted one, with 20th Century Fox. At Fox, John's career reached new heights as he became one of their quintessential handsome men for the studio's increasingly lavish musicals, a counter, albeit pretty much too late, to the RKO musical productions that you might have heard of before, starring Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. He was frequently paired with the biggest female superstars of his era, including Betty Gravel, World War II pinup fame, Alice Faye, and Olympic skating phenom Sonja Henie, my favorite personal pairing between you guys and me. His early Fox successes at that time included Tin Pan Alley in 1940 and The Great American Broadcast in the following year, 1941. If you could mix in Payne's smooth baritone voice, well, soon, Mr. Payne, well, honestly, mostly it was his leading ladies doing the singing. Well, they were introducing songs that became short and quick American standards, like You'll Never Know, and my grandmother's favorite there, I Had the Craziest Dream. One of his most significant musical triumphs, though, and my personal favorite of his musicals, is easily Sun Valley Serenade, which came in 1941. See, in that movie, Payne stars as a guy named Ted Scott, the pianist for the Phil Corey Orchestra. Phil Corey and his orchestra are played by, real life, Glenn Miller and his orchestra. The plot centers on a publicity stunt orchestrated by the band's manager, a guy named Nifty Allen. You probably know him better as Milton Berle. It's one of his earliest film roles. Well, anyways, Milton Berle decides he's going to put on a stunt to get public positive publicity for the band by adopting a foreign war refugee that they expect to meet at the terminal. When they actually get there to see her, see this clip here, turns out to be an adult war refugee, beautiful young woman named Karen, played by Sonja Henie, who's a Norwegian immigrant and who immediately falls in love with Payne's character. Tension rises quickly, though, as the band travels from New York City to a luxurious resort in Sun Valley, Idaho, accompanied by their glamorous but temperamental lead singer, Vivian Dawn, played by a lady named Lynn Barry, who, fun fact, was born and raised also right here in Roanoke. Vivian Dawn, or Lynn Barry's character, plays Ted's girlfriend and is Karen's rival for his affections in the movie. Amidst the stunning alpine scenery that you could expect in a film like this, and Sonja Henie's signature ice skating sequences, of which she won several medals at the Olympics, the film served mostly, though, as a big showcase for the Glenn Miller Orchestra, who played In the Mood for the film, and also premiered their newest song, Chattanooga Choo Choo. By this time, Payne was nearing the height of his fame, and Fox began to trust him with more serious, dramatic roles in films like Remember the Day in 1941, and the military drama To the Shores of Tripoli, 1942, which I actually saw on INSB TV. You ever see Grit TV or something like that that's playing westerns? They actually played this movie about 2 weeks ago. And that film, which featured Payne as a hot-headed and headstrong young Marine, alongside fellow Virginia-born actor Randolph Scott, became Fox's first ever film to net over $1 million at the box office. However, just as his career was hitting its stride, the real world decided it would intervene. Following the outbreak of World War II, Payne put his Hollywood career on temporary hiatus to serve his country. His actual uniform there in the middle. He joined the U.S. Army Air Corps, not yet its own independent military branch, where he served as a flight instructor. During that service, he also appeared in and produced propaganda and training films for the soldiers, including an instructional film regarding the B-29 Superfortress. He remained stateside throughout the conflict until his discharge honorably in 1944, returning quickly to Fox. He immediately starred in The Dolly Sisters in 1945, followed by the melodrama Sentimental Journey in 1946, but also the very critically praised Razor's Edge, also in 1946, about a disaffected World War I pilot returning to find meaning in his peacetime world. If you haven't seen that one, you might have seen the remake with Bill Murray in the mid-1980s. And despite this success, though, Payne was starting to feel that his potential was being stifled, as the studio increasingly viewed him as a secondary Tyrone power, at least according to film historian Janine Bassinger. And indeed, he did play second fiddle to Tyrone Power in Razor's Edge. And that meant that he was often relegated to playing the supporting star to whoever the studio's newest female lead happened to be. And that frustration led to a period of suspension after he refused straight out the next studio assignment given to him by Fox. But it was during this downtime that he began looking for a project that would serve as a vehicle forwards for him. That project turned out to be Miracle on 34th Street in 1947. Payne had discovered the story by Valentine Davies in a magazine and was so moved by the tale of a little girl wanting to know if the Macy's Santa Claus was real that, at least according to some accounts, he personally brought it to the attention of Fox studio executives. When the studio initially balked at his idea, Payne was so committed to the film that, at least according to Ralph Barrier Jr., he put up some of his own money to help finance the production. He was cast as the attorney Fred Gailey, defender of Macy's Mall Santa, Kris Kringle, starring alongside Maureen O'Hara and a young Natalie Wood, in a role that would become his most endearing contribution to cinema, I dare say. But, despite the massive success of Miracle on 34th Street, Payne was still dissatisfied with yet again more broken promises and typecasting that he faced at Fox. And in October of 1947, shortly after the film came out, he successfully negotiated his release from the studio, walking away from a contract with 4 years remaining that would have paid him $670,000. He later remarked that the freedom to choose his own scripts was worth the financial sacrifice, something that many other actors would later follow in his footsteps in, beginning in the late 60s. And he was super eager to shed his image as a cheerful, if staid character in favor of more complex roles. And so now, as a freelance actor, back in the days where this could be very costly to be an actor, Payne deliberately sought out those more hard-boiled roles that would reinvent his screen persona, starting with films like the noir called Larceny in 1948, and then later The Crooked Way in 1949. See, he had entered a highly productive partnership with the Pine Thomas Unit, a B-movie unit at Paramount Pictures, which allowed him to finally utilize his childhood horse riding skills developed and honed right here in Salem in successful westerns like El Paso in 1949. And that indeed was the film that he came to come and promote when he showed up at Roanoke College. And so I offer to you here promotional clipping from the Salem Times-Register, the Colonial Theater that some of you might remember out on West Main Street. That is when El Paso first premiered in this area, early 1949. Now, he also starred in 1950 in The Eagle and the Hawk, but his turn toward grit reached its zenith in the early 50s when he collaborated with a director named Phil Carlson on two classic film noirs, Kansas City Confidential in 1952 and 99 River Street in 1953. There's a French poster for it. By 1952, he noted to several interviewers that he was receiving 4 times the fan mail that he had been getting at Fox, even though he was making far less pictures year on year. During this era, Payne also proved to be one of the most business-savvy actors in Hollywood. He began negotiating for the reversion of film rights to himself after several years and insisted that his movies all be shot in color, at least if possible, a move that eventually made him exceptionally wealthy when he later started renting these films to the newfangled technology called television. His eye for a good deal even led him to pay $1,000 a month option on Ian Fleming's James Bond novel Moonraker in 1955, though he eventually gave up the rights when he realized he couldn't secure the entire upcoming series, including novels like Goldfinger. In 1957, he jumped over into television, starring as one of the first movie-to-TV actors in The Restless Gun, a short-lived adaptation of an earlier radio series called The Six Shooter that had starred a post-war Jimmy Stewart before his climb back to Hollywood megastar status. That's what that image is right here. Payne slipped into the role Stewart had played and seemed to be continuing his successful streak of film and now television appearances while also navigating that crazy busy world with ease. However, things all changed for him on a rainy evening in March 1st, 1961, when he was struck by a car while crossing Madison Avenue in New York City. The impact, quite frankly, was devastating. Payne was tossed into the air and came down face first into the car's windshield, which shattered and caused extensive facial lacerations. He suffered a fractured skull, a left leg broken in 5 places, severe damage to his eyes, and a chin that was mostly cut off. At the hospital where he underwent extensive facial surgery, there was even a question, he said in a 1974 interview, of whether his leg would need to be amputated. But despite losing a significant amount of blood, one source said 5 pints, and spending over 5 months in a hip cast, Payne credited his survival and recovery to the optimistic attitude he maintained throughout his reconstruction. One of Payne's first public appearances following that recovery occurred on December 3rd, 1961, when he served as a guest panelist on the popular CBS game show, What's My Line? He was greeted warmly by the regular panel and would take turns alongside the other panelists, trying to guess the identity of, among others, the new director of the U.S. Mint, a lady, a cow dentist, and later the celebrity guest star of the night, Janet Leigh. And during the episode, panelist Dorothy Kilgallen introduced him by remarking how wonderful it was to see him, quote, fit as a fiddle and all in one piece, end quote, though now sporting a mustache, as you can see here, to hide his facial scars and slight disfigurement. Fellow panelist Bennett Cerf, their English language specialist, also expressed his joy, jokingly noting how glad he was to see that Payne had, quote, beat that car on Madison Avenue. Payne was jovial during the taping of the show, too, teasing the cow dentist as he tried desperately to figure out what exactly the guest did with cows by asking him if he built bomb shelters for cattle, and if not, could he do at least some kind of facial reconstruction on the cows. Fittingly, Payne's distinguishing acting career came to a close in 1975 with a reunion alongside, ironically enough, Janet Leigh for his final on-screen role. After only a handful, including one on Gunsmoke, notably in 1970, after the What's My Line appearance, he co-starred with Leigh and Peter Falk in the Columbo episode titled Forgotten Lady. Thank you, Garrett, for bringing that to my attention. Playing the character of Ned Diamond. I love Columbo, so I don't know how I missed that one. Though he had grown disillusioned with acting by that point in time, he had found a more interesting and lucrative path, though, real estate investment, just like his father had. His extensive cultivation of friends in Hollywood made him a trusted agent, and dozens of high-value clients came his way with ease. John Payne passed away at the age of 77, December 6, 1989, in Malibu, California, due to congestive heart failure. Following his death, his ashes were scattered into the Pacific Ocean, and in a poignant final moment for Payne, his longtime friend and former publicity man, Robert Palmer, noted that as his family kept vigil over him, television, corner of the room, was playing his most famous film, Miracle on 34th Street, while Payne lay unconscious the night before he passed. At the time of his passing, he was surrounded by his children, 3 of them, and his third wife, Alexandra. Throughout his life, it's my reminder to keep it quick. Throughout his life, only a few more minutes, I promise. Payne was married 3 times, beginning with actress Anne Shirley from 37 to 43, followed by actress Gloria DeHaven from 1944 to 1950. And after a serious relationship with his co-star in the film we'll be watching tonight, Colleen Gray, his final marriage was to Alexandra Crowell Curtis in 1953, which lasted until his death. One of his daughters, Clancy, maintained the family's connection to the Roanoke Valley by moving to the area in 1990. And despite her dad's Hollywood stature, she lived in the area for more than 20 years, working as a certified nursing assistant caring for the elderly, but also owning a restaurant all of our visitors lately have been telling us all about checking out. She ran that briefly here in town on East Main Street before eventually returning to California. Now, I would be remiss to not also mention one quick John Payne tale shared with me by one of our members, Miss Mary Langhorne Clark, who unfortunately could not make it here tonight, about her mother, Virginia Smith, daughter of Dr. Charles Smith, the president of Roanoke College from 1920 to 1948. See, Mary called me on the phone the other day to tell me that her mother had gone out on a date with Salem's most eligible bachelor, John Payne once, but found it a very one-sided affair because it would seem that John was less interested in Virginia than he was talking all about himself. I suppose all actors, even local ones, still have a bit of an ego in them. Well, I will also note that thanks today to Miss Jenny Savage, who is here in the audience there. Good wave. She also shared with me something that I'd never seen before. Apparently, you could make big fan fiction of different true life people in that time. And so we discovered that there is a book about John Payne where he plays himself, although fictionalized, coming in and saving the day, fighting against thugs who have kidnapped an elderly grandma in another room who for some reason have invaded her house. I'm not exactly sure what the plot is, and according to Miss Savage, it is still a terrible book. Well, in any case, I have that copy of it right here, somewhere here on one of these tables. So if you'd like to look at that with Miss Savage's permission, you may be able to do that. But long story short, whether you know lots about Mr. Payne or not that much at all, hopefully you've learned a little bit more about our local star and the life he led inside Hollywood and out. And if you're still that rookie reporter I made you pretend to be at the start of this talk in our little exercise, maybe you'll have enough to get your first big scoop on the guy. If you have any questions, I'll try to briefly at least answer those for you. And if not, it's about all I've got. Thank you very much.